I'm Tom Sanderson. I'm the current chair of the club. We are a club with currently 8 volunteer directors, in a sense just a steering group, and one of them is retiring after Christmas, and I'm delighted to announce that we are recruiting 3 new ones, and 2 of them are here tonight. So Sarah Livingston, do you want to stand up and wave? And Nish here, who you'll see in a moment, and there's a gentleman called Nish Kotecha, Sarah Livingston, and Eamon Scullin, who lives in Northern Ireland but runs a company and he's in and out of London a lot. And in our attempt to get people involved, I'm now going to hand straight over to our newest director, Nish, to chair the meeting. So over to you, Nish.
Thank you to Tom and the board for inviting me to join and have an opportunity to contribute back. I've been coming to these events for the last few years, and I've been involved in microfinance and financial inclusion now for about 8 years, and it is financial inclusion. You know, I think the last 5 years we've seen a change in the perception of microcredit, realising that actually it is a full suite of products, and that full suite is credit, insurance, savings, and payments. There's an active debate as to where the on-ramp starts. Does it start from credit? It'd be interesting to hear your experiences tonight. I built a savings-led institution in India with, in 3.5 years, well 4 years this April, we will have served 4 million plus customers. We haven't given that one alone, so it'll be interesting to compare examples. We started from the savings side. Many people start from payments and so on. But that's enough about me. I'm going to introduce Peter Harlock from VisionFund. In fact, Peter and I were just catching up that we were colleagues at Barclays together many, many years ago. I'm a loyal Barclays fan because they took me out of university and I spent most of my years growing up at Barclays under John Varley, as did Peter. So it's a real pleasure that I welcome you to this event and share with us.
Hi everyone, great to be here. Thank you for sparing the time, missing your Christmas party and everything else. There are going to be 2 of us, Jason and I are going to be speaking for about 40 minutes probably. I'm from VisionFund, as Nishit said, and Jason is World Vision. So Jason's got a lot of experience on the development side and the emergency relief side in the field. Afghanistan and Bangladesh, actually living there. And as Bishop said, my background is about half my career in banking, and then with DFID for a few years, and with Save the Children. But I still consider myself a banker, and I'm proud of it. They rise, so we're going to be talking this evening about resilience. Why resilience? Actually, very much as you just said, because a growing realization, I suppose, that resilience building is key to development and moving people along. So what Jason and I are going to be doing is, first of all, in a minute, Jason will be coming up and defining a bit more what resilience is. And then we're going to use a joint project we're doing in Tanzania as a bit of an example of how that works, how microfinance fits with other development work together to build that resilience. A few lessons learned, and then open to the floor, and we look forward to some interesting discussions. So VisionFund is, if you like, a subsidiary of World Vision. World Vision, if you don't know it, is one of the largest development organisations, works in about 90 countries. VisionFund is the microfinance element of that, and we currently have about 36 microfinance operations, MFIs, in different countries. We're part of the same family. We have the same vision, which is about impacting children and improving their lives, enriching their lives. But we do very different things. And I just want to explain that a bit more by what we call the economic ladder. The economic ladder is about poverty and different elements of poverty, right from extreme poor at the top, up through poor to sort of poverty index, sort of poverty line above. And World Vision start down here with the very, very poor, the destitute, those who haven't got enough food to eat, emergencies, haven't got enough water, health issues, and work with them on that. And then, hopefully, as they rise up the economic ladder, then it's doing things like savings groups, continuing on health and things. Those that are a bit further up the ladder, who've got little livelihoods, microfinance credit can come in, some skills training and education, starting to look at things like access to market for groups, which we're going to talk a bit about today. And then on to basically other things, to economic sustainability, and if you like, the poverty line is somewhere around here. So, World Vision and VisionFund, in a lot of day-to-day business, are dealing with different groups. So, World Vision is largely dealing with the extreme poor down here, and VisionFund and Microfinance is more, we would call it the sort of enterprising poor, those who've got some sort of livelihoods. And it's all about trying to help people move up the ladder or helping them not fall down. So building their resilience so that they're not knocked down continually. What is resilience? I'm going to ask Jason to come up and describe what it is, but essentially the dictionary definition is about the ability of someone or a substance to spring back to where it was before. So Jason is now going to take us a bit more through that, and then after Jason we'll get into the example.
So I'm Jason Garrett, and I work for World Vision UK, which is one part of the World Vision partnership. I've been with World Vision about 7 years. Worked on a number of different programs. First of all, on the tsunami response program, so particularly in Sri Lanka and Indonesia, and then I've been working more recently with offices in East Africa, particularly Kenya and Uganda, on a variety of different programs. But I've developed a bit of a specialism in what we now call resilience, and I've worked with offices across a number of different countries. So I come very much from an NGO charity background, so being in a room full of people from the banking industry is not necessarily my comfort zone, but I'm pleased to say I do have links with Barclays, as they look after the small amount of money that my wife and I managed to keep every month. So anyway, resilience. Well, the concept of resilience is relatively new within the development sector, though it has roots that go back some way. It comes really from recognising certain things about how we've generally operated in the past, recognising that actually many of the communities that we work with operate in situations of uncertainty and risk. And what we've tended to do is to assume that we're working in stable environments and assume that certain things won't happen. There's a tendency to develop projects on the basis that, well, actually there won't be a flood or there won't be a drought. We'll assume that out of the way, because if we don't, then nobody's going to want to fund it, are they? Or it's going to have a problem. But of course, assuming those things out of the way in your project design doesn't actually stop them from happening. So there are too many projects that have failed because of some kind of disaster event. And we're also learning that actually most disasters are fairly predictable. You may not know the exact nature of it, you may not know exactly when it's going to happen, but an awful lot of communities are flooded around the same time of year every year. And many communities face drought at the same kind of times of year. So you can anticipate that they are likely to happen. You don't necessarily know the scale of them, but you can anticipate them. And actually, what we realise is that the way you operate, the way you do your projects, the way you work with communities and with government and various other institutions can actually help to prevent those disasters or events, or at least, if not prevent them, reduce the impact of them. And that's kind of the starting point for resilience work and resilience thinking, on the basis that, well, disasters, we often use the term natural disasters. Well, disasters actually aren't natural. Disasters occur because of people's vulnerabilities. A hazard might be natural. So an earthquake is a natural hazard. But people die in earthquakes, not because of an earthquake, but because of poorly built homes and buildings. So if people have living houses and work in offices or in schools or in hospitals that are built to withstand earthquakes, then an earthquake won't be a disaster. And it's one thing that I always find quite depressing, really, when you hear the news of things like earthquakes, is so often it's public buildings that are the ones that collapse. These are the ones that are built, should be built by government and according to regulations and things, and often they're the ones that collapse, probably because people are taking shortcuts and things. There's an example from China from a few years ago, where World Vision had been involved in building a health clinic and spent more money than you might normally do so in order to make it resistant to earthquakes. It probably cost about another 5 or 10% on top of what you might normally spend. And you could view that as liberal waste. But then an earthquake hit, lots of buildings collapsed, but that one didn't. So spending 5 or 10% there meant that you didn't have to spend 100% more to rebuild it, and of course saved lives of the people inside that building. So the idea that disasters occur because of a hazard, but also because of people's vulnerability, is very important to resilience thinking. And that example also shows that spending a bit of money to prevent something happening, rather than spending money to clean up afterwards, it makes a lot of sense. There is a quote that has been around for a little while that actually isn't very accurate, and nobody really knows where it comes from. So I will tell you this, but you must keep it under secret between ourselves. It has been said that £1 spent on disaster preparedness saves £7 or £5 or £9 on disaster response. There's not a huge amount of credible research that goes into those numbers, but essentially it tells a true story that if you prevent something from happening, you will often spend an awful lot less than having to go in afterwards and clean things up. But resilience thinking is not just about those kind of big disasters. We're starting to look at all kinds of shocks and stresses that communities face. Conflict being one, whether that's armed conflict or small, low-level kind of disagreements and conflict that go on between different communities. The impacts of climate change. That is tending to make disaster events bigger, with heavier rainfall, longer droughts, that kind of thing. But also just the change in temperatures means that maybe people's livelihood options have to change, and they've got to adapt to that. And then economic shocks. I mean, we've seen the impact of the economic problems we've had in this country and across Europe and North America in the last few years, the impact that's had on people. Well, economic shocks for poor communities, again, cause major problems. So helping people to be better prepared to deal with those is all part of building resilience. But it's also recognising that, like I said, it's not just about mega disasters. Lots of communities don't necessarily face big disasters that kill lots of people. And they're the kind of things that get into the news, and you can raise the money to go and respond, such as the Philippines. A lot of communities face what we call the everyday disaster, that doesn't necessarily kill people, but erodes livelihoods and prevents people progressing and moving up that economic ladder, continually pushing people back and keeping them in poverty, because they just can't get over or find a way around the regular flooding or droughts that make it difficult for people to say, grow enough food to feed themselves or to earn an income. So that's what we're talking about with resilience, helping people to cope with the shocks and the stresses and disasters that they face in their communities by proactive measures to give people the capacity and the ability to prevent or reduce the impact of those things happening. And looking at the role that microfinance can play in that, I think now we've got a video from Tanzania. Yes, I was going to. In terms of the definition of resilience that we had before, well, DFID, the British government's Department for International Development, recently has taken on the concept of resilience and has a definition here about the ability of countries, communities and households to manage change by maintaining or transforming living standards in the face of shocks or stresses, such as earthquakes, drought, or violent conflict, without compromising long-term prospects. And then World Vision itself has a slightly longer definition, but talks about much the same kind of thing. And so managing shocks and stresses and change, but also recognising that sometimes there are opportunities that come with those as well. So it's not necessarily just about kind of protecting yourself from outside forces, but it's seeing how you can make use of opportunities to transform communities or societies. So, as he says, in particular, to not compromise their long-term prospects, but transforming living standards in the face of those shocks or stresses. So now I think we can go on to the Tanzania video.
Yeah, and let me just briefly introduce it. So we're just going to show you a very brief 3 minutes outline of this specific Tanzania joint program. And it's been the base, the learning base, because there were a lot of lessons sort of learned from it, of a much bigger program that we call Securing Africa's Future, which over the next 5 to 10 years will be very important for World Vision in terms of changing a lot of our, or adding to a lot of our programming around resilience for smallholder farmers.
The market-led agriculture program is designed to address the needs of smallholder farmers to help lift them into the market value chain. They work together at a village, and we call it a commercial village. One very important aspect of the market-led agriculture program is starting with the market. It is actually market-led. So we have analysis to determine what does the market want to buy. What are the varieties? What are the quantities? What is the quality? And then when we understand what that is, we go back and work with the farmers to be sure that they are growing value chain that the market actually wants to buy.
We've provided the funding for the inputs. In other words, we fund the seeds, the fertilizers, the pesticides, and in fact also the labor that many of our clients need to hire in order to help with the planting and harvesting. And we can equip with work-related expertise, with financial literacy, with business basics, with important life skills, that we can see a profound increase in the livelihoods and the lives that these people are leading.
And when they aggregate all of their production at that commercial village level, they are able to negotiate with buyers better prices than they can get when they're just on their own. We help them organize themselves so that they can sell it to the market in bulk. Then they have bargaining power, and then they have better prices.
And in fact, a lot of the produce, particularly when it's shelf stable, ends up in bags and storehouses that then get sold later on, and that provides a safety net, a form of savings for the family. So huge increases in the ability of a family to take care of itself, even in the event of future droughts or floods that result in lower income.
Okay, so a pretty quick overview of that project, but you can see the role that microfinance can play within that whole program. but working with other aspects as well. And there are some good examples there of how microfinance is being used in that particular setting. But in kind of general terms, microfinance can play a few different roles to help build resilience. One of them, like in this example, is access to credit. So farmers can use that credit to invest to reduce risks. So maybe buying more drought-resistant seeds or improved seeds that produce a higher yield, or maybe to invest in a better irrigation system or a water supply, or maybe even in flood protection, for example, investing in building drainage ditches so that land doesn't get flooded, or raising riverbanks to prevent rivers from flooding, or this is talking about access to markets. And in floods, one aspect is that roads often are flooded so people can't travel. So raising the level of a road above the normal flood level is another good investment so that people can still access markets. So that's one way in which microfinance can help to build resilience. But also insurance is another aspect that's been mentioned a bit already so far. And I think there's two ways in particular that insurance, microinsurance, can assist people to build resilience. One is that it helps people to recover more quickly after a disaster. So if there's been loss or damage to crops or homes or buildings or whatever, the right kind of insurance packages can help people to recover and rebuild without having to maybe borrow from other sources that may be much harder to repay, or to use savings, or to maybe sell assets. That's a lot of the time people cope with these kind of situations by selling assets, which then of course they can't use for other things if they're just trying to recover and get back to where they were before. So insurance can help with that. A lot of times poor families get into a lot of difficulty with the death of a family member because of the costs of funerals and various other things. So insurance around that can help as well to mean that the costs of dealing with that aren't eroding people's existing wealth and assets. But also insurance can play another role, which is that if you have insurance, you are actually able to take a few more risks and take advantage of opportunities that are there. So farmers maybe can diversify their livelihoods, try new crop varieties or something, maybe not across everything they do, but knowing that a failure with that isn't as big a disaster as it might be because they've got insurance to back them up. So actually they're able to try new things and therefore increase their income and improve their livelihoods, try new seeds, that kind of thing. So that not just helping people to recover, but insurance can actually give people the kind of solid platform in which to invest and grow.
What's different, actually before I go on to that, just sort of back it, is that VisionFund, for example, we have about 800,000 clients, actually it's more than that now, isn't it, around the world. But in general, we work with those clients in little groups, and those clients are doing different things. What's different for us here, and we want to increase this much more with World Vision, is that we're dealing with actually communities and growers who are growing the same thing. It's large groups. So microfinance for individuals, wonderful, continue to do it. As Nish said, savings is also very important. But this is, if you like, an addition where we can really help communities and groups who are growing the same thing. In this case, it's rice. And really help that community increase their output, their family incomes, and therefore their resilience in a much better way in terms of savings for the family, terms of sort of more reliable crops and things like that. But it is learning, and there are other factors that if you don't do them all at the same time, they will impact you. And we were talking about insurance. Here's a normal rice paddy. This is rather more water than you would normally expect in a rice paddy, for those of you who know rice. And actually, this was the result of substantial rains in the hills and valleys in the surrounding areas. So the program is about dealing with thousands of rice farmers. But
where is this?
this is in Tanzania.
This where?
Northeast of Arusha. I can do it.
Down.
And part of this experiment did include crop insurance, weather insurance. That was part of the experiment, World Vision VisionFund and MicroFinance Club UK-Building. And it was experimental. Now, in fact, this is for those of you who's from insurance here, industry. That's right. Folks, this did not trigger the insurance. Now, you would think that was enough water, wouldn't you? But actually, because of the nature of it, it was actually not quite enough water, but it all came in such a short time that it still had that result. And it's an example that if you use sort of parametric, as it's called, measurements, it still may not trigger the payments. Now, in the event, the underwriter was willing to pay out because this was an experiment. But it shows that, one thing it shows that it's not easy, but the second thing that it shows is it's not just about insurance. And one of the things that this particular pilot didn't involve, that actually World Vision is very involved in, is tree regeneration and planting. And actually, one of the problems is that in a lot of the outlying valleys and hills around this area, there had been substantial denuding of the hills. And so when the rains did come, it was just like that. Now, elsewhere, World Vision actually has been, I've seen some wonderful stuff in Ethiopia and elsewhere, where World Vision actually has been at the forefront of working with communities, again, getting the communities to do it, not World Vision doing it, but and working with other partners like World Bank, to actually help the communities to see that by encouraging the trees to grow back or replanting, they actually, it's back to resilience, exactly what Liz was saying, the actual risk or quantum of the disasters are reduced. So in this particular project, one of the learnings afterwards was actually, in future ones, we should be working at the same time with the relevant surrounding areas on reducing the quantum of the potential risks, not just through insurance, but through things like tree regeneration. So it's just an example. And then, really, these are some of the sort of highlights of lessons learned. I think for me, the two key ones I'd highlight, and then I'm going to ask Jason to do the same, are we do obviously VisionFund, microfinance, different types. Microfinance can make a huge impact on families, but not necessarily. Similarly, development or aid by itself without economic development may not bring impact and resilience. It is about an integrated and thought through set of implementations. There's not a sort of magic bullet. And then I think the other thing, especially about this approach, which has a huge impact to, well, huge potential to increase impact and do it fast, ultimately the community really has to be driving it. It's not about doing things to people because NGOs and others may do it wrong. It really is about engaging and getting the people to make some of those decisions. Jason?
One thing is that, of course, if we're not particularly looking at risk management around this, then actually microfinance can create more vulnerability. If somebody has a loan, microcredit, but we're not recognising the risks that they're facing, then we can create more vulnerability, because if they lose their means of making a livelihood and being able to repay that loan, then they're in an even worse situation than they were before. So it's something that has to be part of a wider package, particularly in some more risk-prone communities, or anywhere really. We have to be very aware of what the risks are, so that we go into the situation much more aware of the potential for various different things to happen, so that other mechanisms are put in place alongside the microfinance to reduce some of those potential risks, so that it can be used more productively, more effectively. That would be one thing. And also, we do need to look at kind of the whole system. It's not just a question of looking at one particular local community, but bringing in other aspects of civil society, also government and the private sector. You might be surprised to hear me say that with my NGO background, but I think we do have to recognise that the private sector is there in all communities, whether it's small local private sector or bigger companies. See how all that links together. What role the government plays in being able to identify risks, and because there are some things, some risks that you can deal with at the local level, but as that previous photograph showed, that you can be doing lots of good work in a particular community, but if there are issues somewhere else, like deforestation on hillsides, then something can happen that is in a way out of your control and cause major flooding in the place where you're working. And sometimes some of those bigger risks, you need the role of the government along with everybody else to work on reducing those risks.
And in fact, sometimes the government is the risk. So in this, it's worth saying, in this particular case, the incomes of the families of the communities increased very substantially in a year, sort of 5 times. So some tremendous work, increases in productivity being linked to buyers in cities and everything else. And then the government, because it felt for the folk in cities in Tanzania were complaining that the price of rice was too high, the government capped the price of rice and imported, I think it was about 500,000 tonnes of rice as well. So you can imagine what that did to the price of rice. Now, for the villagers, they were still sort of better off, but it just shows that, back to the point Jason was making, that the system is actually quite large. We've got to sort of avoid being too simplistic about it.
Brings me quite nicely onto my third point, which is around issues of power and politics that sometimes as NGOs we can try and avoid or don't recognise, but are very, very important. As that showed, that people with greater power can do things that can have a negative impact, and those small farmers have very little voice. But increasing the voice of local communities with their local government, maybe even at the national level, can help to bring about better government. Good government can obviously help, but as we've seen, bad governments can make things worse. And that's again at all kinds of levels. Issues like land rights can be key as well. People are going to invest in land that isn't theirs, or they don't have clear ownership over land. And as we've seen, you need investment to reduce risks sometimes, and farmers aren't going to be prepared to do that if they haven't got clear rights over the land they've got. And land laws and regulations can make a big difference as well. So getting those right is very important. because again, otherwise what we're doing with our microcredit and microfinance isn't going to have the impact that it could have. And there's often issues of power and kind of the role of informal institutions within communities that can play a big role as well. These are often not very easy to see clearly. It's about kind of the way in which things happen. And so things like access to water can be part of that as well. And again, in these kind of situations, water is very important. One example would be from a project that Royal Vision is involved in Ethiopia. Some research that was done showed that an irrigation scheme that had been put in place as part of the development project didn't have the impact that it was supposed to have, because the local culture, the local informal institutions meant that the poorest women were always at the back of the queue to receive the water from the irrigation system, which meant that by the time we got to them, there was no water. And so something that was designed to try and benefit the poorest actually wasn't, because there wasn't enough understanding about some of those kind of institutional processes and local culture. So recognising some of those and dealing with the issues of power that comes up with those is important in all the work we do, including with things like microfinance as well.
That's really an example of what we mean, or how we're working to build resilience in terms of joint projects dealing with larger people. For us, a lot of learnings out of this particular project and things that we're really scaling up in a big way across Africa. No magic bullet, quite difficult, but exciting, very exciting really for us. Over to questions, I think, and comments and discussion generally. The initiative is called Securing Africa's Future, World Vision, and the rough estimate at the moment is probably about $500 million over 5+ years across, at the moment, sort of East and West Africa, and very much focused on, in an integrated way, bringing together elements of water management, environment management in terms of tree, value chain work, credit, microfinance, savings groups. But really, a lot of the elements in an integrated way in different countries, and will come from different sources, from individual donors, from government grants,
local government grants,
and hopefully government and others as well. For us, in VisionFund and World Vision, the economic development aspect of it is, very important. And that doesn't mean we won't, if you like, the core part of our work will continue to be working with individuals in microfinance, but this is a very big way of leveraging and working with larger groups and communities and groups of farmers. So that's sort of what's the difference, really.
So the microfinance will be self-financed, I suppose.
And in terms of the entities, the sustainable, the MFIs, the operations, as they get to scale, they're self-sustaining, except that as the portfolio grows, in general, you also still need to be funding it. But the great thing about microfinance is you can borrow from banks and others. Any banks here? Against your equity. Continually sort of gearing up 3 or 4 times against a grant that an equity that comes in.
Looking with particular markets like coffee or cocoa producers, and I ask this because I was having discussions at Greylands last night with a friend who works for one of the companies that's the biggest chocolate producers. He said that their problem is that there's a massive supply shortage, and that comes from that most of the producers are smallhold farmers, and that the production, the biggest producers worldwide are Ivory Coast and Ghana, where the land production is significantly less than, say, Indonesia, which is still a fairly small part of the market, and asked why they aren't scaling up and producing more. I said, well, one, it's a question of it's mass production. It's small production by many farm holders who haven't invested in fertilizers and just better farming techniques, and also getting better seeds and crops, higher producing crops. And in part that's the government problem, which you gave a nod to, because the government's actually restraining the crops, better seeds coming in. And in part it's the microfinance element is missing. And so sort of, well, why you're a big company, why don't you bridge that gap? And I think that they sort of said, well, there is a working group between the big chocolate producers, but it seems that there's a gap there where they said, well, we're not really the ones to be in the position to be facing each of the farmers.
I know that, for Côte d'Ivoire, I know that World Vision actually is working with some of the cocoa producers, where as VisionFund we're not actually in there. I can talk, so I'm not sure about the cocoa side, but I think you've explained very well the issue. In different countries, in terms of other crops, for instance in Ethiopia, we've worked with coffee producers and coffee to actually exactly the same thing, actually bring lots of smallholders together to enable them to better bargaining power, actually washing, etc., their coffee to get better value because it's high quality, and then linking them in. And actually, we're about to start a program with ginger growers in Ethiopia. So in different countries, it's sort of different crops. But it is, as you say, about actually giving the communities and smallholder farmers the power of actually no longer being sort of isolated individuals, but coming together, whether it's into formalized cooperatives or associations or just jointly working as a community, and enabling them to understand that value chain and access the market. And sometimes it's as simple, I know in Indonesia, on one of World Vision's projects, they literally took some farmers from their community up to, first of all, the regional market, so they could see what happened to their materials, and then literally put them on boats and took them to Jakarta to see what happened and what process, just so they could understand what happened along the value chain, and then choices for them. They may still be too risky for them to make the jump, but they can say, well, what do we need to do to our, if we just, what they realized actually is that if they just sorted actually they were just peanut, they were just nuts. If they sorted their nuts, they could immediately double their price. And if they got together, they could sell to the regional person rather than to. So some of it is actually quite simple, and it's about facilitating them.
One of the things he said in that crop in particular, that it's only harvested for 2 months of the year. So one of the big problems is that it's about spreading that income. So having maybe a microfinance organisation that can choose an annuity for like on the loan, and so that basically.
And it is joining the microfinance as an example of smoothing cash flows.
The issue of you harvest something just for a small period of the year. Some of them came up in the video we saw about Tanzania, was the storage of crops, and that's one of the big issues that farmers face in lots of countries, is that actually they don't have adequate means of storing crops, so they may well try to, but because we know that if you sell everything the moment it's harvested, the prices are very, very low. So if you want to make a decent income, you spread it across the year for when prices rise. But if you find that actually half of it is rotten, then you've wasted that. So actually, a lot of the time we focus on increasing production, when as much focus really should be on the post-harvest issues, particularly around storage and access to market.
That's a very interesting point, because I think this is the IGC, the International Growth Center, which is managed by Oxford and LSE researchers. And they have been following these coffee washing stations in Rwanda for the last 2 to 3 years. But also, not all the blame is always with the buyers, because also when you start to regroup farmers together, because of their kind of limit of being at not exactly anymore the poverty line, a little bit above, but their resilience and their stress level is not good enough, I would say, so that they cannot not see the good opportunity. So when the buyer enters a kind of long-term strategy with them to buy their production and maybe do the efforts that the Côte d'Ivoire farmers could do, then suddenly some kind of third party come into the market and buy immediately, because they cannot wait 6 months or 7 months or 9 months to have a better price tomorrow if there is a good opportunity to sell today. And market systems are pretty tough. And I wanted to know, how is it accepted according to the cultures you work in, this kind of looking for further better deal versus making a quick buck now because my pressures on putting my kids to school need that I have to have the income now.
When people do, I saw a lot of it in Ethiopia, but when people do come together into those groups, one of the first things they do start doing, actually, they do it, is start storing. So they sell some to get immediate cash flow, but together they can actually put some into storage because, as Jason says, even 3 months later, prices can be much higher. And also in those groups, they can either lend to each other, because some of that is, again, back to Nish's point about savings, or, again, through microfinance, take a loan, and then actually some of the cash flow to refund that loan through the hyper. So we are seeing people seeing the opportunity of those savings. And in this Tanzania example, where that's moving on, is that actually they're looking at helping those communities really think about much more advanced storage solutions like refrigeration, and getting sort of social enterprise involvement so that those communities can store flowers ready for shipment or whatever it is. So you know, that is part of the resilience, and increasing production so that you can, basically if you can increase production, then and it's from what you did last year and it's twice as much, then you can still sell some but store some, and that's partly savings. And if you've also got the ability to borrow, to smooth or invest, you know, manage those cash flows, that's how that resilience is being built.
And interesting you're talking about the buyers and the kind of the middlemen, because they often are seen as the bad guys and all things, and they can be. But equally, if you have a system that works well, you have people along that value chain who have particular expertise that they're bringing to that whole thing. And I suppose it comes down to information. If a farmer has enough information to know that they're not being ripped off, but they know that the guy that's buying from them is giving them good information and is able to then access further markets and help earn more for everybody on that chain, then kind of everybody wins. But often the problem for the small individual farmers is they have very little power over that. So bringing people together in groups, like we've seen, gives more bargaining power, and then better information flow and understanding who it is you're dealing with means that you can actually take advantage of the skills and expertise of various people along that chain to benefit everybody.
It's also trust. There's a good example in Rwanda where maize farmers, I mean, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales already tells stories of how farmers don't trust the miller, right? And maize farmers were taking their maize to the miller, and you'd bring a 16-kilo bag and I'd bring a 20-kilo bag, and you'd get more money than I did because you dried your maize. Therefore it was better quality and lighter. But as far as I was concerned, you were getting more for less weight, so we were being ripped off. So it was, I'm not sure if it was World Vision, but there was an NGO that was moving into that environment, developing the communities that we're talking about, and helping as a sort of, what's the word?
Honest broker?
Yeah, an honest broker, to build that trust between the farmers and the millers, which amazes also.
Ethiopia, I came across someone who was working with, I'm not sure whether it might even have been maize actually, with farmers and millers, trying to do some value chain work. and could not understand why the millers did not want to use more efficient machines until they figured out that the waste that the millers made through inefficient machines they were selling off at the side quietly, but when they worked with them to help them see that the millers could actually make more money. So it is that helping people to see how a different, if the value chain works differently, how different people can benefit.
And that issue of trust is quite interesting because I don't know whether a few years ago, Diffie produced, or some other people as well, the sustainable livelihoods framework that is used by the kind of rule of work. And one aspect of that is a pentagram of five capital, five assets, isn't it? Something else, I don't know what it is. But one of those is social capital. There's natural capital, financial capital, a couple of others, and social capital. And trust is a large element of that. And if you've got that going, it can make quite a big difference in all kinds of ways. Whether it's being able to actually work with other people in a kind of business way more efficiently and effectively because you actually have trust. Or, in terms of resilience and dealing with disasters and things like that, having people around that you have that social capital with who can help you in a crisis or those kind of things. It's very, very important, but not something necessarily that we focus on a great deal because it's quite intangible.
I wonder if you could both comment about the risks inherent in concentrating on one production line, so be it rice, coffee. In terms of building resistance, that sort of concentration risk must be taken into consideration. So I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I think you're right. What we often talk about is diversifying livelihoods, so a broader range of things. That might be growing a range of different crops, or it might be doing other things as well, or moving to processing, adding value in that kind of way as well. Because yes, focusing on one thing is very risky. There's one thing that's sometimes talked about a bit in relation to risk reduction and resilience is around the idea of redundancy. In the kind of good sense, not the losing the job sense, where you can cope with one thing not working because everything else is okay. So, so for a farmer, you might want to have a mix of some crops where it's potential for a high yield, but perhaps doesn't deal so well with flood or drought or something, and other crops that maybe the yield isn't as great, but it's pretty hardy and it will produce whatever the conditions are. Getting a balance of those things, because it might be tempting to think, actually, this is a much higher yielding variety, I'll plant all of that, and then you find that the rain isn't quite enough and it produces nothing at all. And then you've lost out completely, whereas of course you don't want to just focus on the things that are traditional and always grow, because you do want to grow, produce more. But it's having a range of those things so that you're spreading your risk in a sense.
I think only that, one of the things we're trying to develop, and in fact Stuart there is our man in charge of it, is weather insurance and crop insurance, so that actually if we can guard against some of the risks and enable people to recover quickly and they can get greater, if you like, productivity, then it's good if they can generate more income from doing a single thing, but we know that in general the people we work with do diversify in some way.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
You mentioned. Yeah. So I was really concerned that insurance was last mentioned underwater. My entire career flooded out. I think that but that's probably appropriate. I think I became very hopeful when I started to see insurance being a component of a more resilient risk managed system than just sitting on its own as a standalone product in the hands of people that didn't have other tools and techniques. And I think diversification is one thing you do, but also if we take a single crop, I think we can add, if you're using insurance as a component, to take some of that risk out of the system. And I think the the honest truth is that the practice of crop insurance hasn't quite met the theory in terms of it holds a lot more prospect that it's been able to deliver just yet. And so we've got to continue to innovate, and our intent is to be at the forefront of the application of insurance techniques to better and better do that. But as part of these resilient systems, I think there's a great prospect for
I think, just to add another comment to that, I mean, I think one of the things with weather-based insurance in a lot of poorer parts of the world is that actually you don't have sufficient meteorological infrastructure to really measure. You know, if you had an index that's based on amount of rain in a particular place over a particular period, and you don't actually have the means of collecting it, then it's very difficult to put into place. And that's one of the problems that we have in certainly a lot of parts of Africa. There simply isn't a means of measuring these things very effectively. So that makes it harder to do.
Question at the back.
I'd be very interested to hear how M-Pesa in East Africa especially has impacted the work you do and how it may
Sorry, can you speak up?
change.
It's a bit difficult for people.
So I was interested to find out how M-Pesa in East Africa might have impacted the work that's being done out there.
I'm not sure directly. I know certainly the widespread availability of mobile phones has all kinds of aspects, all kinds of impacts. One of them being that you go and meet a community and have a meeting with them, and there's phones going off the whole time, people standing up and walking out to answer their phone. But apart from the negatives, there's all kinds of things that benefit just from mobile phones. But I think we probably could make a lot more use of M-Pesa.
M-Pesa obviously used a lot in microfinance for both providing loans, people making savings, people returning loans, and it reducing the cost of provision of microfinance in rural areas, and it's something that we're seeking to develop significantly in different countries. In fact, in Tanzania, doing a lot of piloting at the moment. So for rural communities where there's a lot less microfinance, especially if it's for-profit microfinance, because you've got people spread out, much more expensive to provide it, then it's a huge opportunity. In India, how much are you using the equivalent?
Well, in India, the regulator has curtailed the ability to use M-Pesa in the way that it's being used in Kenya. Interestingly, when I was in Kenya to see M-Pesa, I went over about 3 months ago. The conclusion I came to is M-Pesa is now too big to regulate. Right? So it's not being used in a way that I think the regulators felt it could have been. And one simple example is I heard about a month ago that they tried to arrest the head of Safaricom because the Westgate terrorist attack seemed to have been funded using M-Pesa and unregistered SIMs. That's exactly what the regulators and people in financial inclusion do not want to hear, because that will take us a big step backwards. But it's so big now that my view is they'll make it work. The other regulators in other countries are being a bit more cautious, certainly India, which has always had a tradition of being very cautious. So to give you the example, you can load up your mobile wallet in India, but you're not allowed to take cash out. So you can spend the money that exists on your mobile wallet in electronic form on electronic services, ticketing and so on. But to take cash out, you need a bank account behind it, because the regulator believes that a telco should not be a bank. To some extent, I agree with them. Yeah?
How do you envision the future for your market agricultural program? I mean, are you focusing more on just scaling up the program, or are you hoping that maybe you'll link it to some governmental project, maybe local, or are you hoping perhaps that the local people will kind of mobilize themselves and be able to, handle it themselves?
Ultimately, it should be the local people who are facilitated and empowered in their group to move it on and handle it themselves. I mean, what we are, through Securing Africa's Future, what we are aiming to do is in lots of different countries in slightly different ways to develop different communities of farmers, small farmers communities in whatever crops they judge or with surveys, it's appropriate that we can help them. And sometimes that will be with governments and local governments, in fact as much as possible. Back to the thing about trying to make sure it's integrated and not something done to them, but something done with them. But it's slow and it's individual, but the leverage, the potential for it is very significant.
Best practice in terms of provision of insurance. I wondered about, for example, how poor people should be paying for insurance. Should it be lump sum or monthly? And also whether or not it should be offered as compulsory or voluntary. And if it is voluntary, how do you convince a poor person to spend money on something that's not tangible?
I was writing down for my closing comment. I remember when I first started this journey in India, and I went with an NGO to see a customer who had just come to the end of their first year of life insurance. And the question was, you've had a year of benefit, are you ready to renew? And his response was, why? I didn't die. And I didn't know what to say. You're right. Look, there's a real difficulty in insurance that we've found as a distributor. One is the products are the wrong shapes and sizes. If you get a customer to give you a premium of 10 rupees a month or 50, it may sound perfect for them, but what that means is actually they have no inclination to come back and pay the next month if the amounts are too small, right? So they need to know that they're buying into something that they have to keep up with. They have to keep up with those payments to keep it valid. Setting that amount per month or per year is a real challenge. If you catch them at the wrong time, they can't afford the yearly premium, but it's very attractive to get, as an insurer, to get them to pay on a one-year lump sum because you know they're protected for the year. No one's got it right yet. And the real challenge, certainly the challenge that I foresee is because of the poor distribution channels, and you may or may not agree with me on this, it's very difficult to get back to the insurance manufacturers and say, this is what the product needs to look like. Right? Because you're dealing in markets where up until now, people knock on your door, take a premium, and disappear. So the corruption and fraud around insurance has given it an awful name when it's actually critical to almost protect your growth out of poverty at each stage. Right? And that education it takes time, it takes a lot of hand-holding, it takes a few success stories in each village. I got my money back. I got my money back quickly, and I didn't have to go through lots of hurdles to get it back. Once you start getting back, you do build some support. But we're not there yet. We're a long way from trying to find that right answer.
Can I ask a completely different question, which is the partnerships? We are here in KPMG, and KPMG, for instance, is managing the Africa Enterprise Challenge Fund, which is in East Africa.
Can you speak up?
Sorry. We are here in KPMG, and KPMG is managing the Africa Enterprise Challenge Fund with money from DFID, from 2 or 3 other donors, from the Gates Foundation, from Rockefeller. At lunchtime, some of us in this room were at the presentation of the first results of the pilot business innovation facility. And I was talking with Gatsby Foundation, and all of them, they mentioned to us that what you are doing is their missing link. Because they work with the buyers, they work with the big business, they want to improve the conditions of the farmers, providing quantity and quality, but they don't know how to do it. So have you been a bit too much under the radar in terms of communication? Or are you working already with these people and we don't know when we advise DFID-funded programs so that there is better coordination and you can move not 900,000, but 9 million, or one day 90 million? Because this is the kind of magnitude that we need to make an impact on poverty in Africa, especially, or even in Kenya or in India. In Pakistan or in India. So can you tell us more about these partnerships with the big players in the market?
I know that with certain of the grants that we're doing, whether it's USAID or DFID in certain countries, it's working with key corporates as well in key areas to, if you like, grapple with that missing gap. But I mean, I think increasingly that is going to be where there will be a lot of work to try and join up. So it'll be working both with donors and corporates, sort of going forward. But I think at the moment, I think it probably just depends on different countries, different things, to be honest.
I have a question from, you talked about land rights, and I was just reading my old university's magazine on the way here, and the professor's written a book called Property and Political Order, Land Rights and Structure of Politics in Africa. And the whole book seems to be about the risk of land being taken away from them, and where a large portion of the population rely on land or land ownership or land use rights, whatever that means. Have you had a situation where land is being withdrawn after you provided finance on it, and how you dealt with it, and was it insurable?
I mean, on land rights, it's quite interesting because just speaking to actually one of our board members he's actually from Kenya, he was in Tanzania recently. He said he grew up in a part of Kenya, he grew up in a very poor village. He's an important person now. But they didn't have land rights. And in fact, I think in that place they still don't have land rights. And it has a huge effect on people's ambition and what they can actually do. And this really comes back to what Jason was saying, that there's some elements like land rights which hugely impact what can happen in an area. And in fact, I mean, we all know that in China, PRC recently, there's been a big thing about are land rights going to be given to rural communities so that they can actually trade, because up to now they haven't been able to, and that has a huge impact on movement and consolidation and productivity. So I think, I mean, land rights and advocacy for land rights is huge. I mean, can be a huge factor.
So that right now, because World Vision and VisionFund work in rural areas, typically people have access to land, and it's not a big issue. There's lots of land, there's just not a lot of capital to manage the land. So in our book, we don't have a large problem with that. But it is a growing issue in Africa because it is generally around the donut, around the big cities. So you can imagine people actually on their land around the big cities, but there's no surveys, there's no registration system. If you get registered, you have to pay a lot of money to do it through drives. That's where the biggest problem is, because as the land becomes valuable around the city, people are just coming out, governments are just taking over area, or individuals are going to steal it. And that's the biggest issue that probably that argument's talking about. And that's probably the next big issue that's going to come out, is how do you actually start to demand a registration system, a survey system, and a rights system. You can have a document saying this is going on.
You have a question?
Is the system of family land subdivision from one generation to the next current, and that, you get perpetual subdivision of land within families, and that affects
like France?
Yes.
I think it varies usually from country as well. It's a country.
More of a problem.
Sorry?
More of a problem in Latin America.
I had a question just building on the previous one about partnerships, and whether you're part of GAIN, the Global Alliance on Improved Nutrition, or whether you have a view on it. Because I think we do see a real disparity between fantastic grassroots level work, which is more pilots and experimentation, and then these, on paper, fantastic global initiatives that are dreamt up at Davos, and how those two then mix. Because something like the Global Alliance on Improved Nutrition, you have the traditional players like Unilever, DSM, but what we're talking about now is how we can increase the net to include organisations that are involved in banking, insurance, extractives that produce potash that can be used as fertiliser, etc. Because when you've got something like that initiative, it's coordinating already very closely with government and the public sector, so hopefully then you mitigate against some of these challenges that you've described. things like the Africa risk capacity that's being developed, so that African governments will have to hold lower levels of capital basically for drought, can all be connected. So just wondering if you see that in action, and is it as good in the field as it sounds here in London?
I don't know that. I know we're part of Scale Up Nutrition.
Yes,
it's
related.
Yeah, so we're part of that. I think it was. I don't know too much about it, but if they're linked, then we will be through the Scale Up Nutrition initiative rather than perhaps through GAIN. I think it would be interesting to find out how organisations like World Vision could be
because the need is enormous, but I think the corporate ambition is really big as well. So it's interesting to do something out of the CSR department that we can talk about, but actually we want to identify that shared value opportunity where we can help contribute to society in a way that over the medium to long term becomes a viable commercial proposition as well.
And it's the shared value bit that will really give the multiplication from corporates.
And I suppose working with NGOs perhaps means that you can have more kind of contact with the communities that eventually you want to benefit, because we're working in a lot of those places and have the relationship with government at different levels and various other stakeholders. Because often we can play that role of linking and facilitating those links, but also helping to hold various stakeholders to account for different aspects of it as well.
How are you choosing the places to roll this out? And also, does World Vision work with other microfinance?
There's appetite in Africa by the local, not appetite, but sort of capacity. But essentially it's being rolled out across, actually we're about to announce Southern Africa as well. It will be most countries in Africa where we are
so people will apply to put it in an area, or you actually select an area?
The countries will resource up and start designing projects for it.
Sorry, that's World Vision in the countries?
Yeah. And they're supported from outside.
It's in a lot of places it's a consortium of other organisations.
Yeah, and yes, and it will be with other organisations and so on.
And part of it is, we have existing programs in many communities and districts across lots of countries in Africa. So part of it is people is working in those particular countries already, but also looking at other places. And I suppose looking at the communities with the greatest vulnerabilities, where the risks are being very good, to try and deal with some of these issues. In a way, the impetus for this initiative was a couple of years ago when there was yet another food crisis in East Africa. It was thinking, well, we don't want to be continually giving relief to people because there's another food crisis. Can we work at a bigger scale and go a bit deeper to look at some of the root causes, the underlying issues around vulnerability, around resilience, so that we don't continue with this cycle. So places where they are voice and those vulnerable people are, but also recognising that in itself makes it difficult as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to make a few closing comments, but I jotted down as the presentation was proceeding. £1 of disaster protection is worth 8 times of that in disaster insurance. I love that quote, and I'm sure you'll tell me who didn't say it at some point. A market-led approach, which I found fascinating. So recreating the entire supply chain. It's not just about providing finance at one point, it's implications all the way through. I remember seeing my first loom manufacture in Varanasi in India and they told me how much money they got for a sari that took about 2 months to make. And I was horrified, and my first impression was, I can get you more than that. You know, we'll encourage competition. Then you realise that everyone in that chain is in the same bucket. And unless you're finding a holistic solution to every individual, taking 5 people out of a 20-person chain and helping them grow is simply pointless. You've got to look at the whole market. What is the value chain? Investing in that value chain. So investing in all parts through that value chain. And almost with the use of insurance, as someone grows at each step, each year, they have a little bit more income. How do you protect it? Using micro-insurance, yes, you're right. Tools have got to get better. Products have got to get better. Big problem is distribution. And the understanding of the use of micro-insurance for different products as customers grow. Can microfinance create more risk if it's delivered poorly? The answer is yes. We've seen that in developed countries like subprime in the US, as well as developing countries. Is the problem too big for the NGO community? Absolutely. So unless the NGO community works with governments who have failed to solve this problem, but unless we work as a team, including private partners, commercial businesses, and understand that what their needs are, such as insurers, they're not going to be providing insurance for free, nor should they. It's not sustainable. So bringing all of that together, the role of someone like World Vision and a significant NGO in the marketplace is critical. It's almost the centerpiece of the jigsaw puzzle. So with that, I wanted to thank you, Cecilia, for your presentation. I thought it was excellent.
MicroFinance Club has just finished 12 events for this year, and the program for 2014 is developing very nicely. The January and indeed the February events are already shaped up, and the first one will be measuring the social impact of microfinance with Nicole Pistelli from the Mix market. And so register so that you get to hear about it and come, because we like to see so many familiar faces time and time again.